Welcome to IVF This, episode 21, Feeling Triggered. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing so well. Spring is kicking off here in Austin, and I am soaking up all of the beautiful 70-degree days before it turns obnoxiously hot. I am one of those people that prefers cooler temps, and well, that is pretty incongruent with life in Texas. Around May-ish, it'll start heating up to the 90s, and then June through the first part of October is basically like living on hell's front porch. I'm never really emotionally ready for the heat, but that's okay. I've got a nearly 37-year track record for handling it, so even if I stomp and pout about it, I will be okay. I wanted to share some listener love. This is a review from Audible, one of the many podcast platforms that you can find this podcast. And it was submitted by Anonymous, and the title of it is Perfect Timing. This podcast was found at the most perfect time of my life, and I didn't know how much I needed this until I started listening. The topics hit home in more ways than one, and as a bonus, Miss Ginn speaks from personal experience and examples, and with verbiage and tone that makes it 100% human and personable. Extremely glad I found this, and I have already shared with several other people. People who have instantly commented on how thankful they are to have this podcast to listen to. Thank you for taking time out of your day to write this and for sharing this podcast with others. When we take time to rate and review, it is amazing, but taking that next step to share it with people is extraordinary. So thank you so much. Please keep these reviews coming. Again, ratings and particularly reviews on platforms help podcasts to become discoverable. And so that is one of the biggest elements of podcast success is more and more people discovering it. So I would love to read some more reviews on your podcast. If you would like to make the reviews anonymous, or if you're not comfortable with posting, that's totally fine. You can feel free to email me anytime at hello@ivfthiscoaching.com. Maybe if you have a question you would like answered, or a topic you would like covered, or if you just want to connect, I'm here and I would love to hear from you. Okay. Who is ready to dive into today's topic? Triggers. Ooh, per usual, I have a lot of opinions about this, but I am also acutely aware of the sensitivity of this topic. So for that reason, I will not be spending time talking about specific things that are said or specific triggers. I do have an upcoming podcast that talks about how we navigate the comments that people make, and I think that will come out in a few weeks, but for now, I want to maybe shed some light on triggers and do a little myth busting, because y'all know that's something I really enjoy doing. Okay. Let me set the stage and level set expectations. This episode is not about PTSD or complex PTSD and PTSD triggers associated with that. I am not talking about triggering in the PTSD sense. I do want to take a second and remind people that PTSD is a diagnosis, a mental health diagnosis that is diagnosed after 8 subsection diagnostic criterion are met based on the current DSM classification and diagnostic criteria. That means that not everyone that experiences trauma develops PTSD, right? It's not one-to-one like that. With PTSD, your brain doesn't process trauma in the right way. It doesn't file the memory of the event as being in the past. As a result, you feel stressed and frightened even when you're safe. The brain attaches details like sights or smells to that memory, and these become triggers. They act like buttons that turn on your body's alarm system. When one of those is pushed, your brain switches to danger mode. This may cause you to become frightened, your heart to start racing. The sights and sounds and feelings of the trauma might come rushing back, and that's called a flashback. So if you have PTSD, there are certain things that can trigger a trauma response to activate. Now, the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because people are also very confused about this, because a lot of people assume and talk about triggers as though they are very predictable. But one of the hallmarks of trauma reactivation is that triggers are unpredictable. Now, some might be predictable. I'm not saying they never are, but some are very unpredictable. That's why PTSD can be so challenging for people. Today, I want to address some of the misinformation around triggers and the misuse of that term, especially in the faux empowerment social media influencer space. When I use the word triggers in this episode, it does not pertain to PTSD triggers and trauma activation. I cannot make that more clear. Triggering in this episode, I want you to think of it in quotes, quote unquote triggering. What I'm referring to is the tendency that some of us have to use this word to describe any strong emotion that we feel when we experience something, hear something, see something, or even think about something that creates a negative emotion for us. So I think that conflating this with actual PTSD and post-traumatic triggers is not helpful. That's why I want to be super clear on this. Now, I'm not saying that if you have PTSD and experience triggers, this episode won't be helpful to you. Even those who have PTSD will still experience strong negative emotions not related to your PTSD because, you're a human. And so for that, this episode totally applies. What I'm talking about is the way we misuse and misappropriate these terms and apply it to anytime we have a strong emotion and we want to get away from it. Sometimes we use it to mean that something has sort of been activated, a sensitive point or touchy area for us. Maybe it hits a thought or a feeling pattern that we have from previous experiences. The reason I am hammering this home is because it is so important to not invent too many categories for your thoughts and feelings, because it mystifies your own brain to you. Your brain loves to do this. Your brain likes to categorize things because that's how our brain makes sense of things, right? It loves the yes, no, black, white, right, wrong, good, bad. But when you boil it down, it is just thoughts and feelings. That's all. So something happens, you have a thought about it, then you have a feeling. You might not be aware of the thought, and that's totally fine. You might just notice that you're experiencing a strong feeling. But the thought is always there, and that is what's happening. And that's where we get into trouble when we incorrectly use these words and we don't have PTSD and we're describing intense thoughts and powerful feelings for us, is that we co-opt the real meaning of the term and we turn our own thoughts and feelings that we can learn to change into a syndrome that is beyond our control. It makes it this thing that's outside of us, something that we treat with kid gloves that we think we need to build our lives around avoiding when we have a strong emotion come up. If you've listened to my episode on trauma, I give you a list of things that I call compounding events. These are things that a lot of us might label as triggers, things like baby showers. I'm not going to list them all, but if you haven't listened to that episode, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Infertility trauma is a real thing and it's not talked about nearly enough. It's not normalized nearly enough. But I was very intentional with my use of the term compounding event for this reason. Okay, so we have a very strong emotional response to something. It is totally natural to want to blame the thing and get away from it. Your brain thinks that the threat is outside of you, so it tells you that you need to protect yourself from whatever is outside of you. Your brain almost immediately goes into blame and avoid mode. Blame the thing that's outside of you and try your damnedest to avoid it. Now, this can be super tricky because it can almost feel like self-care. You don't have to look very hard to find memes about cutting out toxic people or toxic situations from your life to better take care of yourself. But when you avoid something or someone just because you're experiencing a strong emotion, I don't necessarily believe that that is truly caring for yourself. It's kind of like using food or alcohol or social media or something else to numb yourself as a way of caring for yourself. It doesn't work. It can help in certain situations, otherwise we wouldn't keep doing it. But that's not what true self-care looks like, because it is, in essence, avoiding the problem or drowning out the thought rather than working on it. And the same is true when you avoid something that you think triggers you or you try to change it so you will feel differently, because when that happens, what you do is you miss an amazing opportunity to learn. As I was preparing this episode, I thought a lot about a few recent experiences that I've had, and one in which that I felt very quote unquote triggered, and one where I was the one who was quote unquote triggering. So several weeks ago, I was texting with a friend of mine. She herself is also an IVF warrior and has gone through, I think, 2 or 3 rounds of IVF. She's experienced 4 transfers and has had a different outcome each time. We were talking about the possibility of my husband and I going through another IVF round. I wrote a response to a question that she had. It was in this vein of, but you already have 2 kids, right? And then what had been a flurry of text messaging suddenly stopped. So she asked a question, I responded, and then all of a sudden it was like silence. This quote unquote triggered a lot of anxiety for me. I know it's a neutral circumstance, 2 people exchanging text messages. I was asked something, I responded, and I had yet to hear a response back from her. Guys, I am a coach. I know that her response or lack of a response is neutral. I teach this to my clients every single day. Yet my brain went to town on all of the potential nonverbal and non-text communication this gap could mean. Maybe I offended her. I admit I can be a little abrupt in my communication style. I can be very direct in my communication style. Then I went on to judge myself for what I wrote her, rethinking it, crafting a mental apology for what I expected to come next. Then I started to get frustrated for her not responding. So I had judgment of myself, and then I started judging my friend. But really, the only thing that was happening was that I had texted this person something, and she did not respond in the time I had kind of subconsciously decided I should get a response. And so my brain lost its shit. My brain was going crazy and I was experiencing so much anxiety. I had a very strong urge to fix what had happened by sending a response text again. Either the carefully crafted apology or maybe even calling her out for what I perceived to be being petty or selfish for not responding. From that place, I could have sent a text. I could have told her that I didn't appreciate feeling ignored, right? Hilariously, she texted me back later that evening saying that she got dragged into meetings and then had to pick up her daughter from daycare, and that right now was the first moment she had had a chance to sit down. When she did, she resumed the conversation. And then I kind of shared with her my little freak out, and she was like, of course I would have responded, right? I've known you a long time and I didn't think you were being insensitive. And if you were so worried, why didn't you just text me again? And the reason I didn't was because I was quote unquote triggered, was because I was having such an intense reaction to the situation based on my thinking. I've worked really hard to get to a place that when I notice that I want to act urgently on something, I know there's work for me to do there. So I didn't want to just fix it by sending another text. And most of us think that by doing that, it would have fixed that feeling for us, depending, of course, on the course of the rest of the conversation, how that would go for us. But I don't want my emotional state to be dependent on things like that. I want to intentionally decide and not be at the whim of someone else's emotions or someone else's actions. So I didn't text back on purpose. I went for a walk. I did some paper thinking. I paid attention to my thoughts. I used that to work more deeply on the issues and obvious need that I had to control the situation and what that brought up for me. Guys, it was terrible. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to BS you. Sitting in that discomfort and uncertainty was awful. I had stuff on my calendar that I needed to get done, and I did it, but I was uncomfortable most of the time. But I am so glad that I took that time, because in the end, while everything was completely fine, I was able to get to a place where I knew I would be fine either way. If she had gotten upset, if she was ignoring me, it didn't matter. I was able to see how my desire to want to know the future and wanting to control what and when someone did something was causing a lot of distress and anxiety for me. And then once the air was totally cleared, I was able to step back and look at the insane temper tantrum my brain had during this time. I gained that much more awareness, which was amazing. If I had shot right back, I would have missed out on that opportunity. So the second example I was going to share with you is one where I was quote unquote triggering something else. I got an email from a listener who also follows me on Instagram, and they said they really didn't like it when I talk about working with me on my podcast or when I include it in my IG posts. They said it feels sleazy, like you're trying to make a buck off of those of us who are already suffering, which I think is so fascinating. I didn't take offense to it at all. I'm more curious than anything, because what happens is that individual loves my content, which is something that they said also in the email, but that when I make an offer to help, they have a negative feeling about it. And they think that coming and telling me about their negative thought and feeling, they will get to feel better. They thinking that if they just get it out, like spewing an emotion on someone else, then they will get to feel better. This is so much of what we do, right? We think that if we can get it out onto the person that we believe is causing them a problem, then we get to feel better. It's such a built-in bias towards thinking that taking action will be the path to peace. But all it is trying to act your way out of a feeling, which doesn't work. Our thoughts create our feelings. Our actions don't. But when we try to do that, we miss out on such a powerful opportunity to question why we are feeling a certain way. So for this person that didn't like me talking about my coaching program on the podcast or on Instagram, why is this so upsetting? If I didn't make offers like this on podcasts or Instagram, and I took money from, say, advertisers, which have gotten a couple of offers to do that, would they have still had a problem with it? Like IVF This brought to you by Blue Apron. Not that they've approached me, but I swear I hear Blue Apron advertised on pretty much every podcast. Anyway, if I had taken advertising, people probably wouldn't even bat an eye. We all intellectually understand that nobody can create and put out free educational or entertaining content without getting paid. I mean, not under the conditions of capitalism like we have. I mean, I don't intend on taking advertisement money at all because I would not recommend something to help people that I didn't 100% believe in. And I don't believe in anything but my coaching as something that I could ever 100% believe in. But it's such an interesting question, right? Why does it bother someone to hear me sell my coaching, but it wouldn't bother them to hear me sell something else? Just one question can pop open the person's thought process around it, around who should help people, when people should help people, when it's okay to promote yourself in your business, what are people allowed or entitled to, and why are they comfortable with me promoting my work? So many interesting thoughts here, all of which get cut off when you try to act from that place of discomfort instead of getting curious as to why you're feeling that way. This person chooses to fast forward whenever I talk about my coaching practice or making offers, which is fine. They're allowed to, but it's avoiding a circumstance because they don't like the feeling they have when they encounter it, which is the opposite of taking responsibility for their thoughts. It's literally the exact opposite of thought work. When I first started on my own journey of thought work and understanding how my brain works, I knew that one thing that I was committed to was moving towards emotions instead of away from them. Now, I'm not perfect at it at all, really at all, but I try to stay focused on what I could learn from this moment and this feeling. Whenever I feel an intense swing of emotion, whether it's something my husband said or something a family or a friend did or said, an event that I'm dreading, someone on social media sharing an opinion that is different than mine, whatever it is, I always try to remind myself, this might be intense and possibly unpleasant, but whatever else, I am going to learn something about my mind from this experience. So that's what happens when I feel triggered, right? Not every time because I'm human, but what I try to stay mindful of is leaning in, getting curious, that I don't take action or try not to take action until I really understand what is happening for me, as opposed to what I am presuming or assuming about someone else. And that is my hope for you. When you feel triggered, get curious. Emotions cannot hurt us. I know they are powerful and they can be unpleasant, but they cannot hurt us. In fact, the more comfortable you are with feeling uncomfortable, the less and less you become worried about what anyone else is doing or saying. You get to be in charge of that and not at anyone else's mercy. If you want some help with that, set up a free consult or a mini session. I will be the one person who won't just validate your painful thoughts. Instead, I help guide you so you can learn how to lean in safely and learn things about your life and yourself and how to change your life. All right, that is what I have for you today, my friends. Remember, I adore you and you have got this. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.